Good evening. Welcome to our Women in Emergency Management and Response panel as part of the We Were There series here at the American Red Cross in Greater New York. My name is Doreen Howe, and I serve as the CEO for the Greater New York region of the Red Cross, and I will be moderating tonight's panel. We have three accomplished women from emergency management and the emergency management and response space with us tonight. I'll tell you a little bit about each of them, and then we will begin our panel discussion. Please, if you have any questions, we have the Q&A, put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to those questions at the end of our panel. So we'll start with Rosie. As Vice President of the American Red Cross Northeast Division, Rosie Taravella oversees Red Cross disaster services, volunteer management, service to the armed forces, fundraising, and external relations in the 9 states that make up the Northeast. This region is home to 57.8 million residents and is the most densely populated region in the country. After a 10-year career fundraising for arts and educational institutions, Rosie joined the Red Cross in 2012 and has led several Northeast Red Cross regions, including an interim assignment as CEO in Greater New York in 2017 and 18. Later that year, she became the CEO for the New Jersey region, continuing to deploy to several disasters, including Hurricane Harvey, the Los Angeles wildfires, and working with local emergency management officials to develop community resilience and improve readiness for large-scale disasters. Our next panelist, Laura Kavanagh, spent 2 decades advising leaders through complex challenges until she became a leader herself as head of the nation's largest fire department. Her views on leadership are shaped by her unusual path to it, from a shy and reserved child growing up in a small rural town to leading a public institution of 17,000 employees with a $2.3 billion budget through 24/7 crises. Laura spent the first half of her career working on local, congressional, mayoral, and presidential campaigns, advising leaders at all levels of government, in particular, first-time candidates. Her desire to see deeper institutional change brought her to government. As an executive at the FDNY for almost 8 years before becoming commissioner, she led through the city's most challenging times: a worldwide pandemic, natural disasters, mass casualty events, and fiscal crises. She was at the forefront of modernizing the agency through technology innovation, and that made the agency more transparent, efficient, and effective. Her work and advocacy brought historic investments to the FDNY and the first responder workforce. Due to those years in the trenches, she was appointed the 34th FDNY commissioner, the first woman to lead the male-dominated institution and the youngest in more than a century. Since leaving city government in 2024, Laura has focused on speaking, writing, and mentoring on women's leadership, serving as a distinguished fellow at NYU, and she is completing her first novel. Our last panelist, Erica Lowry, is a national leader in the disaster recovery programming space. She's a social worker by training and has played a key role in establishing program models for mass casualty disasters, starting with mental health and health services, financial assistance, and close to $100 million in multi-state grants following the September 11 attacks. Erica managed the Superstorm Sandy recovery program's case management, community recovery, and grant making across 5 states, and then led Hurricane Harvey recovery, which addressed financial assistance, issued grants, and engaged in extensive community recovery across 400 miles of the Gulf Coast. So welcome to our 3 panelists. I'll start the discussion by asking a question to each of our panelists that is specific to her career in emergency management and response. And I'll start with you, Laura. So you were the first FDNY commissioner for New York City, and you were in that role during an extremely difficult time, the worldwide pandemic. Can you talk about what it was like to be the first female FDNY commissioner and leading through a pandemic?
Yeah, I think a lot of the role is the same, and I think I actually find a lot of camaraderie with the few other FDNY commissioners that are still around because that is such a unique experience. Like I think the term "it's lonely at the top" holds true, especially in those emergency situations where you feel like there's so few people that you can actually talk to about what's going on. But I think I'd say there's one thing about being a woman that I was really taken aback by in those moments, and it was that I felt comfortable talking about how hard it was, about the emotions involved. And things like COVID, we're not only dealing with the stress of leading through that, we're losing some of our own on the FDNY side, right? So people we knew who were responding to the emergency died of COVID in that period. And so there's real like personal loss on the line in addition to the sort of systemic loss we're all going through, like the upheaval and the stress and the worry. And I actually, that felt like a superpower to me, if I'm being honest. I know a lot of women in that position would say it's really hard to show emotion in a male dominated workplace. And I think that's true. I think there's a fine line. But for me, I felt grateful that I could be the one to say, this is really sad and this is really hard. And that's okay because we're all feeling it. I mean, there's no world in which COVID does not hit you emotionally when you're doing that type of work and losing people. And so I felt sort of very grateful to be able to bring that into the fold in all the work that I did throughout my time there to really recognize like the heartbreaking loss involved in first responders work.
And you were talking when we were speaking about this earlier, you were talking about some of the hardest decisions that you had to make as FDNY commissioner during the pandemic. Can you just speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, the hardest part, and I should say I was first deputy commissioner and the current FDNY commissioner, Lillian Bonsior, was chief of EMS in this period. And so her and I would have to meet every day. We were some of the only people in the office in person. And we would have to have these really enormous discussions, like discussions that are almost too big to imagine at times. Like you don't think this is what you're going to be considering, which is, will the hospitals even be open for patients today? And if they're not, what does that mean when someone calls 911? Are we just going to have to tell people there's no hospital to accept you when you're sick? And our members were getting sick at such high rates that there were going to be calls that we couldn't go on. And so we were talking about how do we tell people like we can't send help when that is like our very core mission, right? And those are the conversations I remember of just, how bad COVID had gotten in New York City. The things, as time has passed, has gone away and has gone away for places that weren't hit as hard. But for New York City, that conversation of like, can we keep going? Can hospitals stay open? Can 911 keep responding to patients was very real. And I remember those conversations will forever be crystallized in Chief Bonsignor and I having to have that, conversation on a daily basis until we got through that peak and talking about what that would look like in the worst case scenario and then the even worst case scenario.
Wow. I mean, just that is as serious a conversation as you can have. And I have to say, the timing of the fire truck going by while you were talking was perfect.
It's kind of a guarantee, I feel like, here in New York City, but it does happen to me a lot. People think I must ask them to drive by. But no, it's just busy around here in Brooklyn.
Thank you. Rosie, moving on to you. You came to the Red Cross from a different kind of nonprofit background, similar to myself. What are some of the skills you came in with that you think were helpful as you began working in the emergency management and response space? And what do you think you weren't ready for or surprised you?
Well, it's a great question, Doreen, and thank you so much for this evening. I had been a fundraiser in the nonprofit world for about 10 years when I joined the Red Cross, mostly in the arts, education, public television sector. So while those were all really fantastic causes, there wasn't the direct impact that a donor or a volunteer could make. So working in what I would call a safety net organization, that was always our category with several funders when we were being supported by United Way and other public institutions. It's such a necessary part of the way our government is structured, for nonprofits such as the Red Cross to come in and help during these dire moments. What surprised me, I mean, the skill set of being able to work with volunteers, board members, develop partnerships, that was all there. But what surprised me, and it's always the part about the Red Cross that makes me cry, was the dedication of our volunteers. All nonprofits have a pretty great cadre of volunteers who do certain things for the organization, but here at the American Red Cross, we completely empower and trust our volunteers to lead, not just be there, but to lead parts of our mission delivery, and the compassion that they show, the willingness that they take on during holidays and during times when they're really walking away from their families to deploy or to pull a 24 or even 36-hour shift during a New York fire or some of the large fires we saw in New Jersey because of the density of the population. It just blew me away. It just blew me away and I was able to speak with it with so much pride to our donors and to all of our supporters. And I think that's one of the things that sets this career apart is the pride that one can have in leading an organization like this.
Yeah, that blew me away too.
Yeah.
Just the incredible dedication and just always willing to step up.
Yeah.
Thank you. Erica, much of your work with the Red Cross has dealt with the recovery phase of a disaster. Can you share about your experiences during Hurricanes Sandy and Harvey, and if there were any lessons learned along the way that helped you to continue to grow in your career?
Sure. And thank you again, Doreen, for having me here today. I think that this is a really important conversation because it's specific to women. And I think it's always important to focus on emergency management, especially right now with the city in a state of heightened alert. We all need to be prepared and connected. And so I'm happy to be here to be part of the connection with the Red Cross. Um, I would say a few things are through lines between even 9/11, Sandy, and Harvey. Data accuracy is paramount, and I think that any of us would say that, whether it's FDNY or Red Cross, it all comes down to the accuracy of the data that you have with flooding events and unfortunately with terrorist events. Lack of data clarity can persist for much longer than you might imagine and be a real point of frustration for the Red Cross as well as our key stakeholders, certainly the clients. Um, I would say that the spinning that can happen in response can sometimes worsen in recovery because community expectations are actually heightened about what an organization can do for them. And that initial kind of hero phase is starting to trough into why haven't I gotten X, Y, and Z? So there's real friction that can happen, and the need to focus on team and establishing a team culture to bolster people in the midst of that situation is hugely important during recovery. And the last two pieces I would say are grant making. At this point, both grant making and the community recovery program, Red Cross has fine-tuned to a fantastic system. It's really systematized how it's going to happen, what the organization is going to fund. And that's terrific for Red Cross. And it's been all four of those issues have been a real asset to my ongoing professional development because they're replicable in any nonprofit situation, but particularly the team culture piece and needing to focus on that.
Thank you. So now we'll move on to questions for all of you and jump in as you feel inspired to do so. My first question, as a woman in emergency management and response myself, I know that it's an unusual career choice for a woman. For me, there was a natural progression because I was in a crisis-oriented space in city government, overseeing the Families with Children shelter system. But I'm wondering, for the three of you, what first inspired you to pursue this career in emergency management and public service?
Well, I think I did touch on it before. The immediacy of being able to help someone was really something I was attracted to. And fortunately, I've never felt any pressure or sense of doubt from the men I've worked with in this field. I find that there's a lot of value that women bring to the what ifs and what clients need. I'm not sure. There's always the need for several types of voices at the table. Not just gender, but race and just remembering religion and areas that would set someone's needs apart. And I mean, I'll just say it out loud. I'm not sure that men that are planning what's in a comfort kit are going to remember feminine hygiene items, right? I mean, let's just call it what it is. Whereas the woman at the table might say, "Hey, don't forget those. We're going to need those," or diapers, or any of the things that we find that the woman in the relationship typically shops for or looks for. So I think it's just an incredible space to be able to bring your compassion and your support for humanity. In an emergency situation, we're all leveled. It's all the same. There's no hierarchy for those who need assistance in times like these.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that I would implore those who are thinking about this as a career to not just see who's in it and be daunted by that. Like in my experience, I like thinking quickly on my feet. I like multitasking. Those are all things I'm good at. To me, an emergency is not daunting at all. I'd actually say that's the way I work well. I work better in that way than a 9 to 5 desk job. And I'm sure that's true of all of us who are attracted to this work. And so I know for me, when I went to the fire department, I was a very curious person. Because I worked in campaigns, I was used to showing up in new places where I didn't know folks. So I knew that like a new group of people was not daunting to me. It was interesting. So I think you want to have that too, but I'd also just encourage women who are looking at it to think about like the skills they have and how it matches the job. And they might find themselves very surprised that they have a lot of them. The men have them too, but it's certainly not because of their gender. It's not their gender alone that brings that to the table. So I hope women kind of can look past that and see in all of us that there's often a really great match.
Yep. I would completely echo that, Laura. And I think just to plug what Disaster Cycle Services and GNY offer, it's in the doing and the availability of training, exercises, online. I think that GNY provides a great forum for women who might be considering either stepping into the emergency management space or expanding on their knowledge. And that for me was the real aha. I had been involved on a kind of peripheral basis just as a GNY employee prior to 9/11, but then being able to step in as a young professional and help and it was cathartic to be helping my own city at a time when people were so desperate to do anything that they possibly could. And I think that it may not be gender specific, but being able to help your neighbors, help your community, and use your skill set, it's an incredible opportunity to plug in your professional skills.
Wow. Thank you all. Can you share any experiences or conditions early in your career that made you question whether emergency management and response was the right place for you?
I think the silence might be related to my answer, which is no. I knew once I got there, I was like, oh, this is actually what I'm very good at. So the nodding on the call might suggest you'll kind of know if it's for you or not once you try it out.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Rosie, did you want to say something
I
before?
was just going to say, I spent 10 years as an actress, and it was a far cry from being an actress. But for better or worse, just a little bit more connectivity to my emotions, right? Like understanding when they're that was the only way I could relate to it in the beginning was, wow, this is really happening and people are suffering, and all the empathy that may have come from my past career, such as it was, really kicked in during those moments.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anything, maybe I would say where it gets hard is burnout, and that's not in the beginning. That's usually once you've been in it for a while, and we could save that for another conversation. But I think that's really the thing to watch out for is if this is for you, you tend to dive into it completely, and you often don't see the burnout coming. And
Yeah.
all of us, the men and women alike, really have to watch out for that because when it catches you, it really can catch you unaware.
Yeah.
Well, what advice would you give to women in this space earlier in their careers to help them to not burn out?
Hmm.
I think relying on the team, right? What I love about this work is that there's many roles involved, and the best you can bring to it is to know your role and to understand everyone else's role. And there literally is strength in numbers, and you'll find over time that maybe you have a skill you didn't know you had, and you may be called upon to bring that skill into each and every response. And that's where the risk is there, that you may be I certainly know many volunteers and friends at the Red Cross who, for better or worse, they're very good at mass casualty events. And so they're always called upon to deliver that special service that they're so incredibly good at. But that's a burnout situation to begin with, right? So
Mhm.
we always have to make sure as leaders that we are building that bench as best we can.
Yeah.
So I would always encourage people who have a special skill and who don't try to be the star. Try to make sure you have a cadre of people that can support you in that special skill that you bring.
Yeah. I would say that over time, all of us identify folks from various parts of our lives whom we can trust to tap us on the shoulder and say, you need to take a break. You're sounding really negative. What's going on, right? Because we don't always in the doing, particularly when it's in the midst of an incident, we don't, or in a recovery startup, we don't have that perspective. And I think we all need people who we know will pull us out if we're not getting enough rest, walking outside, getting exercise, eating enough, all the basic stuff that can then spin out into real burnout. And it starts to affect your performance.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd say it's someone in your workspace and it's someone in your personal life. When you're
Yeah.
really facing some of these big long-term events, your colleagues are probably in it with you and not being able to pull themselves out. So you need
Mhm.
that person in your work life, I think, when things are going okay, but you have to know they probably won't. They're going to be in the same place as you when things are going wrong. And only someone in your personal life can really say, like, I know you've crossed that bridge.
Mhm.
This isn't healthy for you. And so I think you want to have that before you're a leader. It's hard to trust people in the midst of an emergency. You need to have built that trust early in your career in both your
Yeah.
personal life and your staff.
So true.
Yeah, that really rings true to me too. Thank you. Have you navigated situations during your career where your expertise or authority was underestimated or underestimated? What advice would you give others who might be facing a similar type of experience?
Hmm.
I mean, I can jump in if you guys want. I mean, yes, all the time. I think one thing I would encourage women to prepare themselves if stepping into an all male environment. And I want to kind of separate disaster preparedness and firefighting here a little bit. Very male dominated, but in the case of firefighting, 99% male. So I'm sort of talking about this environment where you might literally be the only woman. And I think on some scenes you are, so it can depend where you are. Is just really preparing yourself for the fact that that's going to be the case and not letting it kind of knock you off your axis. I think if you know you're going to walk in and you don't look like someone who's been the boss before, you're probably going to be the only woman in that room, there is actually just a discomfort with that for everyone involved. And I think it's better to acknowledge it at the outset and then seek to move through it than to let it make you feel like you don't belong in that room or you don't have the skills. You know, don't let it sort of become your inner monologue. Because I think once you work to get through it, people do start to see your skill sets and you do start to feel comfortable in that room, but it does take a beat. And you know, there's sort of a difference between are you really not welcome there, or has that room literally never seen anyone like you giving orders in that environment? And if they haven't, you just sort of, maybe this is just for me, but like if you're talking about mental performance, to know that that's not about me, that's about a long-term systemic thing, and that it's sort of everyone in the room is maybe a little uncomfortable with it. I found that more easy to get through because I knew that wasn't about me and I knew I could get to the other side of it with some patience. I think when you walk in and you feel like this could be about me or maybe I don't have the skills, it can get in your head and actually you can sort of perform less as a result. So I think that sort of like mental preparedness that it just might take a beat, you might be the only woman is helpful preparation for a career in an all male field.
That is so well said.
Yeah.
I think that, and I appreciate you making the distinction, Laura, because I think that Red Cross is a fairly kind of egalitarian environment. If you know your stuff, and it may need to be that you have to double back and really know your stuff, but I have not, and my career goes back a bit. I haven't experienced kind of a gender-related questioning of my competency. As long as I knew why I was saying what I was saying, it was well received, and I felt confident delivering it. But it's a very different environment than I think the FDNY.
For
Yeah,
sure.
Doreen, my only challenge has it really hasn't been related to my capabilities. It's just traditional roles, right? So this has nothing to do with disaster. I'll just talk plainly about my marriage. My husband is retired. When we got married, however long ago it was, I guess it was 17 years ago, he had a daughter from a previous marriage. He's always been the caretaker. I've always been the one that went to work. He went to work too, but he retired early. He's the guy that takes care of it all and lets me do my thing. And it's always alarming how many times people get really confused by that, or they'll say things that aren't very supportive, or and I only bring this up because at the Red Cross we also have a women's resource group, and Erica's involved. A lot of us are involved, and we come across this sometimes where our own women in our organization tend to feel as though they they're not being heard or they're being interrupted. And, there's a little bit of a patriarchy, which we try hard in society. I would say not so much at the Red Cross, but we try to remind these young women that, or middle-aged women or old women like me, that your voice is just as important. But we once did an exercise at one of our national meetings. The Women's Resource Group did kind of this fun game where we kept interrupting people while they were playing the game, and we were trying to prove the point that when a woman's at work, there's oftentimes when she'll get a call from the school saying, well, your child needs help, and maybe you filled out that form and said, I'm not the contact for that child. You call her dad.
Yeah.
They still call the mom, there's still this expectation. And
Yep.
so I would say it almost doesn't matter what career you're in. We're still evolving to a place where there's no automatic assumption that, the female in the relationship is necessarily the caretaker. I wish I was. I'd love to say I'm a great caretaker, but it's just never been in the cards for me. And thank God for my husband because he is.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that, Rosie, I'm really glad that you mentioned that is for me, a limitation specific to my family has been I would get wonderful offers in DCS. You can move to Houston and you can do this. You can move to Atlanta and you can do this. And my answer was always no. I can't leave New York City. And that has been a limiting factor for my career at the organization. And that's kind of why my advice to young women professionals is fill that bag of skills, fill it, fill it, fill it, because you're going to need to adapt to any number of situations, not necessarily because of my kind of limiting factor, but it's just a great thing to do because you never know what arena of work you're going to need to pivot to.
Hmm. Well said.
Thank you all for those answers. There might be something to this. Having a supportive partner who cooks you dinner might be the thing you
Anyway,
need.
It makes life incredibly wonderful.
Yeah, we're all very jealous of Rosie.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. So I'm thinking about decision making under pressure. How do you approach a decision where there's no clear right outcome and where, and we've all seen this, I'm sure over and over in our careers, there are some stakeholders who will inevitably be disappointed?
Mm.
Hmm. I'll dive out and I promise I'll be brief. Specific to recovery, very often the decisions have to do with that are tough, have to do with resource allocations and decisions. Because the perception is you have, with these massive disasters, but you have so much money, you have to do this. And I have found that falling back in my decision making on the fundamental principles is often helpful, right? Because if you're the only one in the room and you have to be negotiating a very difficult conversation, you need to have your North Star. So just as a very quick example, we created a health insurance subsidy program after September 11th in tandem with the September 11th Fund. We were in the room with a group of very angry surviving family members who did not understand why the Red Cross was going to be extending the program to people with really serious burn injuries and disabling physical injuries. And everybody in the room went silent except for me. I was the only Red Cross person in the room. And that is, it's just incredibly difficult. You have nothing at your disposal that could convince this other group. So you have to call on, well, why is this organization here doing what it is? And you spin it as best as you can. And thankfully, I think it was convincing in the room.
It's great.
Thank
I
you.
like, I like what you said about the fundamental principles or any values that we have with our respective organizations or just as humans, right? Sometimes that's the deciding factor when you have to make a tough decision.
Yeah.
There are non-negotiables, right? You got to keep your workforce safe. You have to remember the ethics involved in dealing with people who are struggling. And then the fundamental principles at the Red Cross of neutrality, we're going to do our best to serve everyone regardless of race, nationality, et cetera. And then, you just have to kind of explain the why as best you can and try to recover that relationship at a later date if you've disappointed someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a lot of the noise that can become distracting to decision making is coming from folks who are not your North Star and who maybe even don't have a direct stake in what's going on. So if you know that, like for us, the citizen calling 911 and our workforce are the two North Stars, everything else should just be noise when you really break it down. And I think that's always how we made decisions, especially when you're going to make somebody mad anyway, you cut it. If you know you've done the right thing, it'll help. I also think just accepting, I mean, most decisions we make, I can't speak for the Red Cross, most decisions we are having to make as either leaders or first responders are always made without complete
Mhm.
information. I can't recall a time we had all the information we needed. So I think also on your way up the ladder, getting comfortable with that. Sometimes when you're an entry level staffer, you are able to complete your project or get all the information. But once you're the person making the decision at the disaster, you will never have all the information you could want, in part because it's evolving and in part because you have to move before everything is done unfolding. So I think just getting comfortable with that is also important to know. Like, this is the business. if that really deters you, it's not necessarily, I think, the business you might want to go into, because that's the environment you're always in, is some level of not having all the information that you'd
Yeah.
want.
Well said.
It is.
In a space where timing is as vital as the help being provided, can you share a moment where you felt you had to act before you were fully ready?
Hmm.
I mean, I would say COVID, every day of COVID,
Every
because
day.
the
Every day of
information
COVID.
changed every day. Yeah, I remember like every night there'd be these late night phone calls. You guys were probably on some of them. I know my counterparts at OEM were always on them, where we'd like wrap up the day and talk about like how it went, what got done, how many masks did we give out, how many tests got done. And sometimes like those would go so late into the middle of the night, you'd like fall asleep on the call. You'd wake back up a couple
Wow.
hours later, and at 4 or 5 a.m., there was new CDC information. And so whatever you'd done the day before had to suddenly be completely changed. It was different distancing, different types of masks, different transmission of the virus. And I remember at a certain point that just felt so frustrating, because you could feel the frustration of people in the field who wanted better information, or were tired of being told it's this mask and now it's this mask, or we do have enough, now we don't. But we couldn't get that either. I mean, the reality is people just didn't know, and so they would change the advice each day. And I think that's where I felt the greatest frustration is, how can we tell people what to do when every day it changes, and every day we don't actually know 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that I have a better example than that. That's amazing.
Yeah, same here. Laura
Okay.
wins that one.
It's hard.
Okay. I'll do a couple more questions, and then Ned has let me know that there are some really good questions in the Q&A, so we'll go over to those. But couple more before we do that. Can you remember the first emergency that you were involved in where you were able to see and feel the human impact of your work?
I do. I was I was a brand new Red Cross regional executive in upstate New York, Syracuse, and there was a pretty significant flood in Madison County and Oneida County, right along the Mohawk River, and it was the first time we were going to be sheltering people, and I just remember driving over to kind of the center of gravity, and um, the American Red Cross had already begun to deploy volunteers into the area. And when the majority of cars and trucks I were looking at were Red Cross vehicles, it hit me, that the army had arrived, right? My little town needed help, and we had the resources at our disposal. And that's how I knew I had come to an organization where just the commitment to helping others was so strong, and that people were driving in from New York City, from Philadelphia. I mean, they were part of our response almost immediately, and it was a moment where I just had so much pride, and was really really delighted to know that I was in such a well supported organization.
It's amazing. I
Mhm.
have a very mundane example compared to that, but it was I think I was 6 months into my student internship at the Red Cross. And it was a massive snowstorm that completely shut down the city. And I lived 10 blocks away from the Midtown shelter site, which was tourists, unhoused people. It was just kind of a mix, and they didn't have anybody else to do the overnight shelter director role. And this was a very different time. I had no training. I was just a student. But that in and of itself was incredible, because I walked in, I was oriented to the forms, I oriented people, I settled people on their couches, on their cots, not their couches. Um, and to be able to help in that tangible way was just amazing. And I just worked for 10 hours straight. And I went from not having any idea what I was doing to being able to preside and orient the incoming shelter director the next day. And I think that that's just a really tangible example of what Red Cross is so good at.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if I remember my first disaster, to be honest. I think what I'd say, maybe because I think the folks on this call fill a lot of these roles, I remember the first time I realized that my work as a civilian could make a difference in the front line. And well before I was commissioner, I was working on technology, and that had been very sort of fraught. There was a lot of technology invested that the front line didn't use and didn't find useful. And there was real like a need for really useful technology. And so I'd been working on that in the background. And I think for a long time, sort of wondering, are my skills, project management, technology and innovation, are those really useful? They're not nearly as sexy as responding to emergencies, but like, are they making a difference here? Because they're my skills, and I was trying to put them to use. I remember the first ride along I did where a chief was telling me about the technology they had just gotten, unbeknownst to him that I had worked on it, and was
Uh,
really bragging about like how useful this finally was in this call he was responding to. And that's the first time I thought, okay, I'm doing something right. Like my skills in the background can make a difference. And
Right.
sort of also put it as a plug for all of us who do that kind of work that we don't always know whether or not it's making a difference on the front line, that it definitely does.
Yeah.
which kind of leads right to the last question I'll ask before we go to the questions in the chat. If you could go back in time, what is something that you wish you had known when you were still in the early stages of your career?
I mean, I
I
would say
think,
for me, I wish I'd known to be more vocal. I was a
Mm.
very, very, very shy kid, painfully shy, notable to everyone who knew me. I turned down the first deputy commissioner job the first time it was offered to me, and the commissioner asked me why, and I said I didn't want to speak in public. And he basically said, that's not an option. I know you can do this and help me through. So he was a great mentor, but I wish I had known that earlier. When you care about things, the only way to really move the public conversation on them is to express how you feel and to try to convince others and, to convey, even for your team, how they're doing. I don't think being shy is a bad thing. I think I learned a lot. I think I became a good listener, but I wish I had built up that skill a little bit earlier in my career and not been so afraid of the idea of sharing what I thought about things.
Powerful advice.
Yeah.
um, I would say I lost a few iterations to being busy. So I in early in my career, I didn't build that skill, that bag of skills that I was referencing before, because I would always say, I can't go to the PMP training because I'm too busy. I can't learn Python because I'm too busy. And that I think I needed to force myself to come to the realization that you have to build your skills to be valuable to your workplace and to the clients that you're serving. And it required really forcefully redirecting my attention. I wish I had done that sooner.
Yeah. And I wish I'd trusted my leadership capability a little bit earlier than it came to me. It was kind of a surprise. When I came into nonprofit leadership, I was always brought in because of fundraising skills, being an actress and a television writer and a theatrical producer. I was comfortable selling myself, but didn't realize I had the substance underneath. Those were temporary assignments. You got a paycheck and off you went to the next freelance assignment. But understanding that in the end, my real passion became leading people and giving them the confidence to be successful. And I never knew that was lurking. And I wish I'd just known myself a little better at the beginning.
Great point.
Okay, I am looking at a bunch of great questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to just start with Dorothy's. Dorothy is one of our board members. Dorothy is asking, have you had role models in your field, and could you speak of the topic of mentorship?
Mm.
I often say, what would Clara do? I often say, what would Clara do? Clara Barton, I have a picture of her back here, helping out the soldiers, and she's such an inspiration. If you're a woman who works at the Red Cross and you don't know her story, you better learn it quick because it's pretty amazing. But she was so determined to get her point across and her idea across to a very male dominated Senate and political arena, and she got there. She did it. It's just so inspiring. Such an inspiring story.
Yeah. Laura, you want to go? I don't want to
Sure.
jump in.
I think I'd say a couple of things. I saw some of the questions in the chat. They're also about like men and how you find a mentor. When you're in an all male environment, I think I'd say a few things about mentorship. One, you should not just have one mentor in your life. You usually need a lot of mentors for a lot of different things. As simple as, I'm not good at this skill and I want you to help me through it, to, I've followed your career trajectory and I'm interested in learning from you. You also definitely want male mentors if you're in an environment like mine. That's a necessity, and you will find plenty of men who are willing and supportive. And then lastly, you don't actually need a mentor to agree to be your mentor for them to be your mentor. So like I did a lot, especially as both a woman, an outsider, someone who is so shy. I did a lot of just watching other people work, and that, I would look at how they responded to something. I'd think, is that what I would have done, or would I have done something different? And then I'd see the outcome. I'd watch how they spoke in certain rooms and in certain like disaster situations. You can learn a whole lot. You don't have to have someone say they're going to be your mentor each and every day of the week in order to learn a lot from them. And then the last thing I'd say is just know the difference between sponsorship and mentorship. This is super important because all the research shows men get sponsors and women get mentors, like that they ask for mentors. A mentor is someone who can take your call, who can, be a sounding board. A sponsor is someone who says, I believe in your career and I want to see you in this position, and I have the time and energy to do it, which not everybody does. And it's an important distinction. You can have a lot of mentors, and you should, and they don't always need to agree to do it. But a sponsor is something you need to work towards, takes a while to get, and often requires someone having the bandwidth and the knowledge of your work. But you also want that too as you go up the ladder. Someone needs to say, she should be allowed in this room, or she should be in charge of this, or she's really good at this, and I want to see her in it. That's a very different thing than someone you call to just like bounce ideas off of, which is important too, but you really need both.
Yeah. I was going to speak about a specific person, but instead I just want to foot stomp what Laura said because I think that is hugely important. And I would say that if you find yourself in an environment, maybe give it upwards of a year, and if you're not feeling that sense of sponsorship, you may want to reassess where you are because it's very, very important.
Yeah.
Wow.
And when you're called upon to mentor, which has happened of late, I find that I learn very, very much from my mentee as well. I
Mm,
think, keeping it as a very open relationship and again, it seems to be my theme, but admitting when you don't know something, being able to just be transparent and say, I never thought of that. That's a great, I find when I'm asked to mentor people, I learn a lot myself.
yeah,
Damn.
that's a lovely point.
Thank you all. So this question's a little bit the opposite. Have you ever experienced sabotage type tactics on the way up the ladder? And if so, how did you overcome
Hmm.
That person's no longer with us. No, I'm kidding.
it?
I did have sabotage once. I can't believe this question came up. It had nothing to do with this field though, so I'll refrain. I'm sure there's a better story.
I
Um,
I definitely. Oh, go ahead, Laura. And I'll finish.
no, no, go ahead.
Um, have definitely experienced that. Not from above, but from peers. There being competition for positions or for leadership attention, and you just learn to have a very, very, very thick skin,
Mhm.
very thick. And if you have to throw an elbow, but persist in the path that you're on.
Yeah, I definitely have. I will not dig into it. All you need to do is Google me. Um, forewarn you of what you will find. But I'd say a couple of things. I went back to school in 2021, and part of the reason I did that is I saw what happened as people went up the ladder and sort of studied not only women, but people who were different, people who spoke up about things needing to change and saw patterns. And I went back to school to study them. And so for me, that was really important to understand the way my organization worked, how it responded to change. And that's a little different for every organization, but all organizations don't respond well to change. They all respond a little bit differently, but generally an organization will protect itself. And so that was really helpful to me because it did not surprise me when it happened. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt as a person, but there's a difference between does this hurt or frustrate me, and do I know whether this is about me personally, or do I understand this is something that's happened to a lot of other people? And I really, I was eyes wide open for better or worse. And so that was really important. I think for me, always like knowing how a place works is really important for like self-management. It's also important for like continuing to have your own faith in the organization and understanding this is like a slice of, organizational life that's not pleasant that everybody has, but it doesn't represent the whole. So I think that's really important. I think I'd re-emphasize something we all said at the beginning. It's a reason to have trusted folks at work and trusted folks in your life. You as a leader want to be self-reflective and take critique. And sometimes sabotage can be hard to understand the difference. Am I being given fair critique, or is someone unfairly coming after me? And the only way for you to really muddle through that is to have people you trust who can give you real critique and tell you what you need to ignore and can ignore. And you need people in your life and people at work to do that.
Definitely.
Wow. And I guess that also just dovetails right into having sponsors and mentors and finding them for yourself.
Yep.
So thank you for that. So here's a question that I don't know if it is applicable to any of the three of you, but I think it might be interesting to see if you have any thoughts about it. So Jody is asking what recommendations you might have for mid-career women who've been trained for this world and have great experience, but are trying to break back into the workspace after taking time away to raise kids.
There's absolutely no reason why I wouldn't consider a person who's looking for work. If I were the hiring manager in that situation, I think we carry with us a guilt about taking a gap in employment, but I think these days it would be foolish for a hiring manager to find fault with something like that. I think it comes back to unconscious bias, which we were getting at a little while ago. If this person is out of work for a very valid reason and then decides to come back in, I think the onus is on them to try to learn some skills maybe that technology has brought other coworkers along. Maybe that's really if the know-how is there, the know-how is there, and it wouldn't necessarily preclude me from wanting to interview somebody who's mid-level who took some time off. But again, I think it's a good idea to develop some technological skills, just to make sure that you're not too far behind your competitors.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, I'd also say like if you are having trouble with a particular hiring manager, or maybe just like the, sort of like AI bots that are managing resumes these days, I would try to find someone on LinkedIn that you think would be receptive who's at that organization. I know I've had women contact me on LinkedIn saying like exactly that. I took a break for kids, maybe for parent care. Does that matter? And I think like these women, it not only doesn't matter, I'd actually say there are very often like non-traditional paths where someone brings extremely valuable experience from having done that into this. So they're not only not lacking, they have a sort of unique perspective, but sometimes it takes finding the person, especially if you're talking about an all-male organization. And I agree with what Rosie opened with, that sometimes just women living slightly different lives can be seen as unusual. Find the woman who's going to hear you out. I think like most women in these organizations are not only gonna not care, but see it as valuable and want to help you figure out who to talk to get around that as you get back into the workforce.
Yep.
Will Mary's asking, what books or podcasts do you recommend for professional development?
Well, there's a lot of good ones out there.
Yeah.
I like Leading Change by John Cotter. I think that's really helped me understand when we take on new initiatives or sunset others, finding those early wins, bringing the team along when they're all saying, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. And then you have like an early victory. It's one of the steps he talks about in Leading Change that's always stayed with me.
This one's kind of maybe a little well known or not well known, and that's Adam Grant. He's an organizational management professor at Penn. He has a podcast that can be interesting to listen to. Sometimes it's spot on to a challenge that I'm facing, and sometimes it's just vaguely related. But his exchanges with the people that he has on the podcast are always very interesting.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those. Also say I don't have the link on me, but I get asked this so often that I have like a Google Doc of books people have asked about. And the reason I'd say that's important, I think one of the things people think is there's like a magical book with the answer. And that is never true. And I think what Erica just mentioned is so relevant. Like sometimes they're speaking to what you're struggling with and sometimes they're not. So like when I teach my students, I always tell them like buy the book and go to the chapter you need. You do not need to read the whole book. This is not like a homework assignment, Like if you're a leader and you're muddling through one thing, and which is why I made this list, it's sort of by challenge, you could say. It's like go to those few books, find two differing opinions, read them, and then say, okay, that's the one that fits or that helped me and move on. There's not magical advice in the world, and I think that's actually good to know. I think some of us feel like we just need to get that right book. There's a million things out there and you can go to them at the moment you're in that challenge and they can like kind of help you muddle through.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A great resource.
For sure. I think we'll let Shirley's question be the last question. And this is, what has been the biggest adversity in your careers?
Ooh, biggest adversity?
Yeah, big question.
Yeah, that's actually hard.
I think I may repeat the reference I made earlier, which is working on recovery that at the Red Cross, it's time limited. The most it's ever been, I think, is 5 years, and typically it's 18 months to 2 years. So I've committed to this area of work that fascinates me, but it's cyclical, right? So it's on, off, and that's been a sort of adversity because I've needed to morph and look nationally for consulting opportunities or projects that are outside of the Red Cross because it's not a continuous through line. And so it's patchwork. I don't know if the adversity it's as strong a statement as that, but it's a little bit limiting. And I love it. So it's worth the limiting for me.
Well, you two were thinking, and if you don't have one, that's fine. I have one, and it came to me as I was reading Shirley's question. When I was 42 years old and got my first couple gray hairs, I had a boss who referred to me as a mature woman, and I felt for the first time, and at 42, I felt ageism. And I think women experience that in a different way and maybe more than men do, because men in leadership roles with gray hair are thought of as wise. I think women, as I was told, I was just a mature woman.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I'd say I mentioned mine already, I guess, which is just being so painfully shy has been a real journey for me, but it's hard to say that it's adversity on the other side of it. I mean, it really made me a much better leader. I think it made me relate better to other people and leaders. You know, I don't walk into a room thinking like I've got it all figured out and I should definitely be in charge. I have an amount of like self-reflection that I think we actually like want in our leaders. But so it's hard for me to say that's adversity, but certainly maybe it's a plug for challenging ourselves on the skill that we feel shakiest about. I think that is where you find probably the most growth.
Thank you.
I got nothing, Doreen.
It's okay, Rosie.
I've been very fortunate. Most of my friends and coworkers have been quite supportive of my willingness to just be goofy sometimes. You know, it's part of our lives. Just bring it.
Yeah. Well, thank you to the three of you for joining us tonight and being so forthcoming and open and sharing your experiences. This was really great for me, and I'm sure for the folks who have been listening, this was a really unique and valuable experience. So thank you all.
Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Thank-
Take
Yeah,
care.
same here.